CSS to customize a JavaScript library, to take an existing library that's used in a widget and be able to then, change its appearance and behavior using CSS. Does that sound like something people would be interested in doing, or?
Absolutely.
Well, if you're gonna, if you all said no, I was gonna do it anyway. So it's always good to ask,
The
ask
illusion of choice.
the illusion of choice. Yeah, well, tough. Good luck. Tough. Fab. Okay, so you should all be able to see my screen, see a text editor, and welcome to my website. Is that what people can see?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go bare bones today. I'm not gonna use any of this VS Code or AI stuff or whatever in here. We're gonna look at the way I've written web pages for about 30 years.
TextMate.
But
Holy
yeah,
cow.
so yeah, I'm
Appreciate
using I'm using I'm using TextMate, and apologies to Marcus for it being white background rather than dark mode. I think we'll sort of look to struggle through it. So on the left hand side here, I've got a project that I've set up using Jeremy's JS Dev environment. In this instance, I'm not going to run it inside a FileMaker. I'm just going to run it in the web browser. So not really going to look at how we load code in here. We're just going to have a look at what it's kind of styled inside. So on the left here, I've got my index.html. Then in here, we've just got a bit of random HTML which is loaded inside of it. So I asked ChatGTP to generate me a piece of code that included most commonly used HTML elements. So at the top here, we've got a body with a header that says welcome to my website, some paragraph tags. We've got maybe something in here that might be a navigation. We've got some section tags in here, which has a section, and we've got an image inside of here. We've got a list, a UL, an unordered list, which gives us bullet points, and an ordered list in terms of here. So this is all pretty basic kind of HTML stuff, and this is what we would get if we have little or no CSS kind of applied to it. So
Gabe, can I just quickly interrupt? Can
yeah,
you save a copy of that's been unedited or unstyled?
yeah,
That would be really useful for setting up a style guide to
mhm,
have that
yeah,
and
yeah.
then set that up because it's unaltered, it'll be a
Yeah,
great resource to have access to.
yeah, absolutely. What I'll do is I'll zip up this whole distro, and then I'll post it on the community if anyone wants to kind of use it to sort of have a play. But yeah, effectively in here, so we can see the HTML in here. So if we look at the style sheet in here, at the moment, this stuff in here is commented out. You can see in CSS we're able to kind of comment stuff out in here, enabling or disabling it. And the only style that's applied at the moment is to reset the font family. So if I save this in here, what we should see on the right hand side is this is what it's going to look like without any style. So this is a bit what we looked at last time. So in here, obviously at the body level in here, we're applying a font family. So we're saying use the font Arial, and if you don't have Arial installed on the computer, choose the next nearest sans serif. Obviously we can change the family name in here. So in here I've got an instance of data tables. So if we look in here, I've actually got a table element in here. And in this instance, rather than using any dynamic loading of the data table, is I'm simply applying data table onto a table element, which obviously is a table with what's called a T head, which is what contains the table headers inside of here. So effectively, when the data table gets loaded, whether it's loaded with live data, this is what it will actually draw onto the DOM. So for each table row, it will make a TR tag inside of here, which contains a TD. So if I was to inspect this element in here, we'll see that we've got a table element inside of here. So whether these are statically generated, as in they just typed out in the HTML in here, or whether these are loaded via a script from FileMaker or something like that, they end up looking the same. And the way that the styling and the behavior of the system is determined, it doesn't really make any difference how those elements were added. They're just added inside of here. So we may this is the default appearance of data tables, which doesn't really, is quite kind of vanilla plain, doesn't give us a lot of, doesn't necessarily look the nicest, and isn't maybe the most user kind of, you know, the nicest UI for a table. But we still get some basic stuff, like we can see which column things are filtered on. We have the search, or we can search for John. It's going to do all this sort of searching type of here. So effectively, this is what our table will look like when we don't have any styling kind of applied to it. So generally speaking, when we're using like a data table, this is my vertical market solution, we will have buttons and other bits and pieces like that. And a lot of the time, certainly what I want to do is to match the style of the stuff in my web viewer to match the rest of my user interface, because I want the users not to necessarily know that this is a data tables view. But if I was just to go to a standard list view in here, this is just a FileMaker, good old traditional FileMaker list view with a bunch of columns and some buttons. You know, a master detail view in here. You know, that as you would expect, fairly standard for each systems. So how did I take this data tables, which by default will look something like this, and I make it look like this? So I've got these rounded corners on here. I've got the, you know, the lines in between. I've got the same color and styles on my button in here. So effectively, the way I do it, and I don't know how other people do it, is I tend to, using the web inspector in here, make my changes in real time to the code in here, and so I can see what's happening as I change that, and then be able to you know, copy that into the CSS. So for instance, in here, I can see I've got my table in here. So you can see in here, it's got our table, our team. So that's come from my ID that's applied in here. Down at the bottom in my JavaScript, I've basically just called make a new data table using that hash, which is the ID selector, to be able to select that. What we'll see over here, if we compare what the HTML looks like when it's actually rendered versus how it started off, you can see we've got the table, the head with one row in it, and then a body with a number of rows in here. We can see that there's actually a whole load of classes and other information which has been applied onto these elements, which has been applied by the data tables library once it's happened, because my table head in here doesn't have any attributes applied to it, whereas in here this is been told it's got a row span, it's got some classes in here. So we see like DT orderable ascending. So what data tables is doing is it's applying classes to say, actually, when this column is sorted in the ascending order, add in this class DT, data tables orderable ascending, and when I toggle that in there, you'll see that actually this is now updated to have the DT orderable descending class applied, and when I click it a third time, it's now it's no longer sorted. So if I want to change, so let's say I find these little arrows, they're not super clear which of the fields on here is being ordered. What I might want to do is I might want to change the background of the that table head when the sort's applied. So in here I can see that actually when it's sorted as descending in here, there's a class here that's applied to that. So if I wanted to, I could say, right, well, at the top here, I'm just going to add an inline style, and I'm going to say background, if I type in the right place, background, and then I'm going to say it's RGB in here, and I'm going to say, I don't know, 128. So this might be a red, green, blue color inside of here. I can in here just pick the selector in here and just say, right, well, actually, maybe I want to make this a nice pale bluish color, like this, to show that this one is being highlighted. Maybe a teal color like that. So if I want to, I'm making a change in here, and you can see this is applying this style in here with a style tag down here, background. So this allows me to then say, right, I've now got a style, and I'm happy that I want it to look like that when that's applied. So now what I need to do is I need to copy data tables descending and make a CSS style rule for that. I'm just going to get rid of all of that. So this instance is a TH, so I can write TH in here, do a dot for the class selector, and then have that style in here. So now this is going to say any element is a TH element that has the class DT audible descending, and then I want to just copy this particular value from here and paste it in here and save. So now over here, when I refresh my page in here, now at the moment that's applied it to actually all of these, so I can see that all of these have the class. So actually data tables orderable just says whether it is orderable or not, is not necessarily whether it has the ordering applied. So we want to copy this class orderable descending. No, that is the same. So that is applied DT orderable descending, DT orderable descending. This is where I should have practiced this first. So the change in there is saying whether it's ascending or not. So you can see in here that this highlights the changes as they're happening.
Mm.
I'm looking to see what's changing there. Aha, aria sort equals descending. So I can in here do a style selector. Ooh. To say when this is sorting by ascending or descending. But let's say, for instance, we also wanted to add a bottom border, because at the moment, if we've got a big table in here, we want to apply to the bottom of our border in here. Bottom of each of these rows in here, we want to add a bottom border in here. So we say border dash bottom. 1 pixel solid, and then we could pick a color, RGB, and make that be a light gray color. Just going to type a number quickly in here. So now we can see on this particular cell, we've applied a background of this, but it's only applied to this particular cell. If we wanted to apply it to all of the cells, we'd need to then target just this particular all instances of a TD. So in here in our
So
style,
you've memorized all the color codes.
over time, yeah.
It's pretty impressive. Yeah.
And that obviously you can. The other thing to do would be to say, right,
you can explicitly say which color too. I mean,
yeah. So what I could do in
or
here,
something, right?
yeah, is I could say I could open up ChatGTP,
Yeah.
and I could say I have this HTML. Can you add a light gray border? If I could type properly, and it would tell me, and it will give me a style rule. It might. Let's see if it will inline it or if it will put it in line in here. So you can, if you need to. So it says here, our team. So that's adding it to a table row. Border 1px solid light grey. So I could, if I couldn't remember what those styles were, I could take that style in here. So in this instance, what we'll see is because the table that I pasted in here has a particular ID of our team, this CSS rule that it's provided is saying only do that in the table rows where the table has that. Generally speaking, if I'm doing it may not matter because we've only got one table on a page, but we probably don't need to specify just one particular instance of a table. So this is where the kind of precedence kind of comes in the order of selection. So because I've said just apply it to every single row in here, then if I had two tables on the page, I might have it on the same in a widget having some tail at the top and down there. Generally speaking, we might want all those tables to look the same. So as a good rule, what I tend to do is start with having my CSS styles be applied as broadly as possible. So apply them to everything and then override them in a particular instance. So in here, what we might decide is, well, actually, we've got this line down the bottom here. So if we have a look and say, these have got a nice light gray stripe in between them, but now we've got this kind of border at the bottom, which is kind of, is a darker gray than this gray. So we can have a look, and I don't know where that styling has come from. It could be in a couple of places. It could be on the table row, it could be on the bottom of the table cells, or it could actually be on the bottom of the T body instance. So this is where I need to have a look, and this is where I'm selecting the elements in here. So I can look at the table body on the right hand side in here. I can see what styles does it have applied to it. Actually, it doesn't have any border on the table body element itself. So I could look, is it applied at a table row level? I have a look at the table row and say, actually, well, the only rule, there's no border on this. It has a background color of, transparent white. But actually, if I look at this table cell in here, we can see here we've got a more complex CSS selector. This is saying every single div that's in a data tables container that is inside of a table body, and it is the last child, and it is any child of the last row, then apply this particular border to it. So if I turn off that style in there, we can see this complex CSS selector in here is basically saying every single table cell in the last row of the table, give it a 1 pixel bottom border of this dark gray color in here, which is slightly transparent. So in this instance, maybe we don't want to have this dark color in here. We want to override that. But if we look at what's being applied, our table cell in here, down here, we've got our declaration, which we added in here, which we said make the body #F down here. But this is getting overridden. You can see there's a line through here. And actually, the way this is shown in here is it will show you where the styles are coming from. So this border bottom here is overriding the declaration down here. Because of the level of its specificity, it's more specific. So it's overriding that rule. So there's a couple of things we could do to get around it.
Gabe, can you highlight, is there a way to know what's overriding it? Like if I hover or if I command click or do I just have to look up the cascade to see?
So if we were to look at this, so what's happening on there? So I can right click and click inspect.
Yeah.
So in here I can see basically it showed the top rule that is applied in here. So over on the right hand side, this will show you what it says under computed. This will show you basically of all of the styles applied to it, this is what it ends up being. So if we look, border bottom, color is this, and the width is this, and the style is this. So we're saying down here we've got a 1 pixel border. Then what we would look for is then in the left hand side, where is that specified by which rules? So these styles that come in here are applied by data tables. They've come from the data table style sheet. But this rule in here of mine is getting overridden. So one thing I could do in here is I go in here and put exclamation mark important at the end of it, and I'm going to hope that that's going to then override. That's kind of a bit of a kind of a hard wire. Important says ignore everything else that's been applied and just apply that. So that could be one way in which we want to override it. another way.
Or give it 3 exclamations, and then
You
it's
can
really
give it,
important.
but then if we have a rule which already has important on it, then we need to type an important, and we can have an indefinite number of important things set. But actually what we can do is we can just take this selection in here. So this in here is the rule from the data table style sheet, which is being applied. So if we look at that in here, we can see there's 2 declarations. So this applies to either that instance or that instance. What I might choose to do, rather than overriding important, because we might then want something else to be applied onto it, we could just say, right, in this instance, we want to apply this rule in here. And what I would probably do is I would just say, right, put a TD declaration in here. So in CSS, we have this comma separated list, which is this part is the selection. So we're saying, what's the selection criteria, and then what rules get applied in here. So we can have a comma separated list. So this will say, right, find me every element that is a TD. But what this second line will do is it will say, find me all of the elements where this is true, and find me all the elements where this is true. So we can apply the same style to different elements in here. So if I click save in here and refresh that, that's going to have overridden it. So now when we have a look at our cell in here, we can see that actually our style in here on line 779 is overriding this one in here. We can click on the rule in here and it will take us to exactly in the document where that rule is specified. So if we look at all of our HTML, so in Node, when Parcel packages this together, it takes this HTML. We've got an import here of the data table style sheet, which is what we're seeing in here. We're then importing our own style sheet in here. So if we have a look in here, all of this is the data table style sheets. These are all the default styles. There's loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of it. If we look then to see where this rule comes from, line 779, we'll see this bit down the bottom here is our style rules which have been applied, and we can see these lines appear in here. Obviously, if we set Parcel to minify that when we build it, then the browser has to then like deminify it, to be able to see what's actually happening. But this is where the sort of the CSS order of operations comes into effect, because if in here I put my own style sheet first, my local style sheet in here, and then imported the data table style sheet in here, when I refresh this in here, you see that this line has gone back to being solid because my rules are being set up here, and then the data tables rules are being applied afterwards, and it's a kind of the latest overrides the previous ones. So because the selectors are identical, the later one takes precedence, if that makes sense.
Does JavaScript also have that same kind of hierarchy when you're importing JavaScript?
Yes, kind of. A document is processed top to bottom. So if you declare a variable at the top, like a global variable that's called, Gabe's variable at the top, if then further down you say Gabe's variable equals something else, then it will override it. What will normally happen is if you have two, like var something or const something equals this, if you then try and declare it later, that's one of the main differences between a variable and a let or a constant, is that if you try and declare it more than once, it will throw an error. Whereas the variable is like, yeah, I'm a variable, that's fine, you can declare me again, loosey goosey, which is one of the reasons why you might be overriding something that's further up in a library, which is why then you kind of JavaScript libraries, when you include multiple ones of them, need to be careful that they variable collision, that they don't have anything else that is the same, because if you've declared another variable, I've used var data in my library, and then someone else uses data later, there's normally a name spacing kind of thing in there that applies like that. So depending on what library it is, depends on how well or badly this CSS is written. I find the data table CSS is a bit confusing in the terms of these descendant selectors and various bits and pieces like that. It's often not clear in this instance where you might think, looking at the styles on these headers, that the ascending is applied when it's ascending, but actually these orderable assemble are applied in both places. So sometimes you need to just kind of be aware of how it's kind of set up. But often you'll find that you want to override a default style that's applied from a library. So the easiest way can be just to copy the same definition and use it to override that particular instance, if that makes sense. Does anyone have any questions about that so far? Does that make sense to everyone? Anything else you think we'd
Makes
like
sense.
anything you think we'd like to change about this table? What should we change about it?
Can you make the descending one color and the ascending another?
Yeah, I was trying to do that. So I'm trying to work out what changes in between them. So this in here, I'm going to copy it out and do a diff. So that's what's applied when it is descending. Okay, so okay, I see what I've done here. So these are the classes. These are the classes that are applied when the item is orderable. I mean, as in it means you can click on that header and you can update it or not. And then this is the class that says, so this basically says it can be ordered ascending, it can be ordered descending, and its current state is it's being ordered ascending. So I was copying, the reason it wasn't working, I was copying this class because it's orderable versus ordering. So now what I probably want to do in here is say, only apply this to the table head when it's ascending. And actually what we probably want to do is have that be the same color for if it's going up or going down, if it's ascending or descending in here. So what this will do is this should then apply the color to the background in here when it's being ascended or descending. I think they do it this way because you can obviously specify some columns to not be orderable. So you probably want to make it look visually obvious that yes, this is something you can click at, because the user may not be able to kind of tell that certain columns. So for instance, in here, what I've done in here is all of these columns are orderable, but what I've done is I didn't like these little up and down arrows because they're sort of, to me, they look a little bit odd. So in here, when I'm ordering ascending or descending, what I've done, if we look at this little element in here, so my implementation of this, I've said the table head in here. What you notice in here is this has got the table head and we've got this colon before. So the way that those arrows are actually added is they use what's called a CSS pseudo element, which is you can create an element which is either before or after, which is an element that's kind of made on the fly, but is a separate DOM entity that allows us to apply some styling to that. So in here, in my style sheet, have overridden it to say when we are sorting ascending, this imaginary element, not imaginary, this virtual element which is created before the element has the content of an up arrow. It has the style display block. It's positioned from the right hand side. Its position is absolute, so I can choose where I want to, how far from the top, how far from the bottom. I can move it up and down like that if I want to, and I can choose how big that arrow is as a percentage of the font size. So in here, if I wanted to have, use, trying to think of something like a hat character like that, I could change that in here. So you can just, as if you want to, customize the appearance, if I refresh that, of what these elements are, because I personally found that made it clearer than these light grey. There's a, you know, they look, unless you're looking really closely, it's quite hard to see, like, you know, by default which of these is highlighted, and especially if anyone has, you know, not great eyesight, looking the difference between those two is a bit confusing. So that's an area where I've then basically customized the appearance of those to make it just be an up arrow or a down arrow. The other thing that I've done in here in this particular data tables instance is I've added these curved tops at the bottom here. So this is what's happening here is we're looking at a load of orders, and they're grouped by their status. So here's the ones which are pre-planning, here's the ones that are manufactured. So by the order now we can see which orders are inside of there. So I wanted them to look a little bit like a card, where you've got a chunk of them in this status and a chunk of them in this status.
Is that one table or is that several
It's
tables?
just one table. So if we look in here, if we look at the underlying HTML in here, we can see we've got our data tables in here. You see, I've got one here which is a fake, which is what I've called a fake header. Then I've got an odd row in here. So if I look at down here, we've got a fake header, an even row, an odd row, an even row, an odd row. If we wanted to have them alternating colors, we could do that in there. So by using the column group property of data tables, where you can say when I want my records to be grouped by a particular field, there's a way to then change how you want that row to be displayed. So I've created a class in here which says for a header row, rather than it just appearing as a normal row, add this custom class that I've set up called fake header. And then when I look at actually what's applied to a fake header, is this has a border radius on the right hand side, a border radius on the left hand side. It has a background which is transparent. It has more padding.
Where's the space between them?
So that's
Is that a margin?
that's my fake footer. So if I look at the fake header in here, so if I look at the that uses in here the position, and you see up here there's a blank row in here which is set to have a column. So it basically has there is a row with a cell, but this one is set to basically not have any background colors in here. So you'll see that after the fake footer is the curved bottom row. So I've inserted a table row, and then there's a blank row in between, which is set then to not have a background color. So basically by saying every time there's a new group, a new column group, I'm inserting a fake footer, a fake header, and a blank row in between. And I've then used the CSS styles to say, right, when we've got a table row that has the class blank on it, then I'm overriding it to say make the background transparent, basically make it appear invisible because it doesn't have a background row in there. So that way then, however this table is grouped or sorted, everywhere where I've got a group, I'm making it appear like this. Where I do this in a FileMaker list view in here, this is where you would do it with like a sub-summary. So you say basically, have a summary when it's broken on the product type sort order, add a title in here, and add one of these, and add a curved top, and have a trailing footer down the bottom with a little box with the curved on either side. So that then allows me to then produce the same effect in a FileMaker list view, whereby the type that they have this kind of curved appearance. But in here, this is done in just a FileMaker list view with a summary where this is the sub summary and these are the rows, but then in a data table it's done the same way. So that then basically allows me to have it appear the same. So and obviously what I've done is matched the font, the color, what the buttons look like to be the same. So I've done that once from my data tables implementation, and then whichever data tables, wherever I use data tables across my system, it always matches my FileMaker theme, if that makes sense. So in places I do a card view, so this is a data table in here. So this is a set of different types of schedules in here. And these are actually table rows, but I've used CSS to style them as like a floating card where they kind of float across. And obviously these allow you to do things you can't do in FileMaker, like have a different number of columns. So if we have a look in here about how
Crazy. That's wild.
this is applied. So under the hood, I mean, this is just a normal data tables view. But all I've done in here is I've said, right, this table row here, when it has this class cards applied to the table, there's a class applied at the top level up here, somewhere, dot cards. It's applied on the body class up here, cards. So basically this rule in here says, right, rather than displaying yourself as you would do for a normal table row, let's float left. Let's make you be a block level element rather than a table element. Let's change your width, change your padding, change your overflow in here. So this is what they would have looked like as normal table rows. There's a bit of styling on the cells to make the first one dark and the first one even. But by simply changing the CSS that's applied to each of those table rows in HTML, any element has a default behavior. A table looks like a table, but you can make any element appear in any way you want to by using, in here we're using a float, so they are like a block level element that float to the left and they can have a particular size in here. Then it allows me to have a card style interface, but use data tables, so I get all the nice filtering and searching and stuff like that in here.
Loading and all that is something that always ends up being a mess for me. And I don't know. I guess I just haven't done it enough, but like, because there's float, but then there's like I don't know. If I try to design just a page that's dynamic and all that kind of stuff, trying to get so that way when you move it one way, the text, some things are the other one that throws me is the position, absolute position versus relative versus floating versus that stuff always gives me a hard time. Not that you have to cover it all right now, but like I got to figure that out.
Yeah, so that is a key thing is about understanding about how CSS works is the difference between block level elements, which basically there's a line break after them. That's kind of how they work, and inline elements where like a word takes up a certain amount of space and the other things apply kind of after them. So let's say in here this section, so this is a bit like a div element, it's called a section. This is by default, you can see in here, the user agent style sheet, this is a block level element. So that's what's applied by the browser's default style sheet. If I want to say in this instance, let's make this float this left. Float left.
My biggest issue is the positioning of absolute and relative. That still kind of boggles my mind. I can't fathom it.
It's
still hard to understand.
I mean, it's basically absolute is relative is moves it from where it would have otherwise have been. So if I move it the left, it goes right. Well, where should it appear? And then let's move it the top, left, right, or whatever. Absolute then says right, relative to either the page, if nothing it, or the closest parent that has display relative position. So that's the way to think about it, but it does make it a bit complex. So in this instance, I've applied a float to this. So basically what it says is, rather than there being a line break and this about thing appears underneath in the about section down here, if I put a float on that, it basically these things kind of move over to the left. But
But now they're like, but you can see right there, for instance, they're overlapping.
So
So you have
that's
to add
because
like
we've
more
applied
margin
float.
there or
We've
something.
applied well. We've made this one float, but we haven't made this one float. So we can have a look in here and we can see, well, actually, so this element is put in here because these ones, and you can see by hovering over it, you can see that's where that one is. So it's kind of a block. This one appears in here. The services one is still a block level element, so it's still going to try and squish it in as much as possible. Obviously, if we put float in here, it's going to put it next to it, but that's probably not where we want to put it.
Where before you floated it, where does it get that position from? Where it overlaps?
So the reason it overlaps is because the default, if we look at the unordered list, we'll see in here, these list elements, this text in here hangs on the left hand side, but these numbers hang in the gutter on the left hand side of it. So the numbers are flying over it. So that will push them because these don't have any styling on them. So if we wanted to say, right, have home, about us, and put services underneath in here, we could type clear both. And what that basically says is clear any floating elements and wrap me back round underneath. It's kind of like putting a hard line break inside of here. So that then allows us to do it. So this is how CSS was done. Most websites were laid out using floats and positions. Now, more and more, we would probably use CSS Flexbox, which is more complex, but gives you a lot more control over grids of boxes and what scales and what positions and whether something expands and other bits and pieces like that, which is kind of a slightly different topic.
So when I start building and I'm talking to chat and all this stuff, it ends up kind of Frankensteined together. I don't feel good about it.
And you can, when you're using like ChatGPT and stuff like that, it kind of works because it can sort of copy code that it has seen elsewhere as to how that's structured in the CSS, especially using something like Tailwind. What it doesn't necessarily do is it can't really render in its brain what the resulting CSS looks like. It knows what the code is, and it knows what other patterns are for common styles that are applied to stuff, and it understands the rules of CSS, but it doesn't necessarily, it can't see what it actually looks like in your browser. So you sometimes have to tell it then, oh, that's wrapped it underneath, and it'll go, oh, well, that problem might be caused by this, and here's a common fix for that. So it's then applying it, but it's kind of doing it blind in that instance. Whereas when it's writing JavaScript, it writes the JavaScript and it can then look at it and work out, right, it's formatted correctly, and it'll produce correctly formatted CSS, but the result of it is very, very complex because the position and size of everything in a HTML document is dependent on all the other things in there. So it's quite a different thing to know deterministically where things will end up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And it often puts in 4 or 5 different hacks that it's seen to make it do something, and it probably only needs one of them or whatever, but it's put them in anyway because it's seen these are kind of coding principles sort of from there. But yeah, I mean, often it depends. I mean, the easiest things to sort of change are like the fonts and the colors and other bits and pieces like that. It is obviously possible to do that in JavaScript in a lot of places where we just say, add a style or whatever in there. But using CSS can mean that you can have more consistency across there. So where you've got some styles that you've built up for your widgets, you can say, right, everywhere where I've got an A tag, a link, let's make it a background. Blue, color, white. So everywhere we have a link tag, it's going to give me a blue background. If I spell color the American way. Then
they're just subtle reminders of who won the Revolutionary War.
We might say, padding.
Oh boy.
2px, 5px, or something like that. So now everywhere we've got a link in here that's just my link tags at the top, or in here we've got them to appear in a certain way, and then we might say we don't want the text, we don't want the underline, we do text. None. So
what's
now,
a text decoration?
text decoration is like underlined or not. So the default appearance for a link is like underlined in there. So where we've maybe made it a blue button in here, and we could do
Because it's not expecting the box around the background.
Yeah, because HTML is designed that by default it was text with links were just in text or whatever, and then so in here if we want to make it look like a button, and we probably want to then say, you know what, when we hover over a button, so we've used this attribute selector, which is : hover, which says all the A tags where we hover over them. Let's make it really ugly and make it red. Then we hover over them, we make them red like that.
We used to have a guy who was colorblind, and
oh, okay.
sometimes it was more obvious than others, but
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, this is where you're starting from an unstyled document. Most of the time when you're using a JavaScript library, they will use something like Tailwind or Bootstrap or something where you're not actually getting no style at all. They give you a default sort of look, so things kind of look okay. So the buttons kind of look like a decent button or something like that, which is what a lot of the time, so that when you start a library or a table or whatever, it looks, reasonable, they apply some styles to it. So it's sometimes easier to style something from scratch because you don't have to worry about overriding how things are styled and stuff like that. But that's where you kind of want to understand, because it's kind of like, well, this hover in here with this border around the outside of it isn't great. I might want to change that to be something that looks more like a hover and other bits and pieces like that. But yeah, I think that's kind of
that's really cool stuff.
In sort of introduction. So yeah. Anyone have any questions? Anyone have anything they sort of want to?
No, that's great. I mean, that CSS is such a deep subject. I mean, it's cool what you can do with it, but it's a whole study in and of itself.
It is, yeah, and
Inspector makes it a lot easier.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, back in the day before the Web Inspector came along, in Firefox originally, it was the sort of thing that had it originally. Being able to monkey about with the settings live in here is great, because if I I'm not sure I want to make this, maybe make the font size. I don't know what sort of font size I want it to be, and I can just go in here and I can up and down decide, right, well, maybe let's go 2.5. And making changes in here rather than save and refresh and stuff like that. You can just say, right, well, find the element that you've got and put it in here. The old debug trick is to kind of, when you're trying to work something out, you'd have to take the element and put border 1 pixel solid red, and that's how you'd work out where the rule is being applied to. Like, is it like when your selection is getting overridden and other bits and pieces like that. So yeah.